You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's fast, fun, free, daily deep dive Bible, and right now we're working on the book of Nehemiah. If you're new, welcome. You can jump in right here, or you can always go back and start at the beginning of any season. The whole podcast is available in an easy-to-use format at thetmbh.com.
As we're looking at Nehemiah chapter 8 today and the events of September 27th, 444 BC, where they had a great big giant assembly near the Watergate in the recently rebuilt city of Jerusalem, hosted by Ezra and Nehemiah, one of the great all-time literary crossover events. As this is happening, there's a massive assembly, and there's a very practical question that I have about it that I want to explore with you. But first, let me just read the passage that we're looking at here. It's in Nehemiah chapter 8, basically chapter 8. It's the end of 7 and into 8. When the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, all the people assembled as one man in the square before the water gate. September 27th, 444 BC. And you'll notice the language here is pretty passive. It doesn't say all the people were assembled as one man, as though someone did it or rounded them up or like, all right, we finished the thing, now we got to do the thing. You get the impression from the text that they wanted to be there and that this seemed like the next natural step to take, given the undertaking they had just completed. Who knows? Maybe people put out flyers, stapled things to telephone poles, and there were phone numbers you could tear off. Like, we're having a meeting at the Watergate. Make sure to show up at this time. Maybe that was the case. But from the text, you get the impression that this is something everybody really just wanted to do. They told Ezra the scribe to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded for Israel. Now, there's a little bit of debate here about what we mean by the book of the law of Moses. Some smart people look at this and say, well, that would be the 5 books that are attributed to Moses in the Old Testament, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. If you don't remember what all of those things are, it's easy to do a quick brush up because we did that through the Bible series. The first 5 episodes of season 2 are one-day single episode summaries of each of those 5 books, but we've kind of touched on them here over the last week or so. And the gist of these 5 books is that the human problem is introduced, the idea that God has made a covenant with and chosen Abraham and his descendants to work through and to be in relationship with is introduced. Then we figure out these people, like all people, have pretty serious problems. They end up in slavery. God miraculously frees them from slavery, getting them out of Egypt, and tells them that they're going to go to this promised land that is meant for them, but they don't go. They hang out in the desert for a long time because the generation that escaped Egypt sort of has a social, moral, ethical, personality, character meltdown out there in the desert. And instead, God takes in the next generation, the ones that were more or less born in the desert, to be the ones to go in and conquer the little kingdoms within Canaan and to establish themselves in that place probably around 1200 or maybe as far back as 1400 BC. Then the rest of the first 5 books of the Old Testament is about this covenant, this deal that God makes between himself and the descendants of Abraham who are alive, led by Moses. Some of the stuff in there is very big picture and everybody's heard of it, like the 10 Commandments. Some of the stuff in there is very, very specific and even the kind of thing that can be fodder for internet joking and so forth, because this rule seems really picayunish, or that rule seems very particular, or this rule flies in the face of immutable, very recent cultural assumptions and trends. And so even if you haven't really read through the Bible sort of by cultural osmosis, you will have caught tons of stuff from the first 5 books. Now, we have spent a little bit of time in the book of Deuteronomy of late. Well, it breaks down like this. Some smart people think that what I just told you about, the stories and the giving of the law and all of that business in those full 5 books, that is what the people were saying. Bring out Ezra, read to us that stuff. We want to know that. There are other real smart people who are saying, well, they just would have pulled out the book of Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy sort of sums up everything from those first 5 books, the books of Moses. And Deuteronomy would already be a pre-baked template for how to host the kind of event that they were looking to have here on September 27th, 444 BC, sort of a covenant renewal, a proclamation of the covenant, and a rededication of the masses to the covenant. Deuteronomy is more or less just that. It's one big, long meeting, mostly, and it covers the ins and outs and little detail stuff of the law that feels kind of foreign to the modern reader at first glance. And it also covers the big picture stuff of the law, like the big commandments and all of that. And it covers the terms and conditions. What happens if you obey this? What happens if you don't? It covers the character of God, his faithfulness. It's all right there. And it gives also a model for how the people as an assembly, as a crowd, can assent to it and sign off on it. So there's good reason in terms of the content of the first 5 books of the Bible to make a case for, hey, when they said get out the book of the law of Moses, they meant the first 5 books. There's also good reason from a content perspective to argue, well, they just would have meant Deuteronomy, because basically what they go on to do here in the rest of Nehemiah is Deuteronomy. They follow the beats of the meeting described in Deuteronomy. But I would like to take a bit more practical look at that and suggest to you that I think it's more likely that it was just the book of Deuteronomy that they were looking at here, simply from a time constraint perspective. Think about this. You and I, whatever it was a few years ago, we decided we were going to go through the whole book of Matthew together, and we did that. It was very, very fun. There's 28 chapters in Matthew. I don't know why I'm flipping over there. I know by heart that there are 28 chapters in Matthew, but now I'm there. Yep, sure enough, 28. I looked at it with my own eyes just now. They haven't added one. It's still 28, just like it was last time I read it. It took us 800 episodes to get through that. 800 episodes. That's a long, long time. What was that in real time for you and me? Like 3 years or something like that. That was a very, very long time. And why did it take so long? I mean, I guess we could have just read Matthew, and that would have taken maybe 20 daily episodes, 28 daily episodes if we did a chapter per day. I think that's probably realistic. But it took longer, of course, because we were working on it. We were trying to understand it and to follow all the little rabbit trails and really get what Jesus was saying and what Matthew was saying, how Jesus was presented and what you're supposed to do with it and all of that kind of stuff. That takes a minute. Well, that is what's going on here. Verse 2 of Nehemiah 8. So on the first day of the 7th month, September 27th, 444 BC, Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly, which was made up of men and women, and all who were able to understand. He read it aloud from daybreak till noon as he faced the square before the water gate in the presence of the men, women, and others who could understand. And all the people listened attentively to the book of the law. And then there's kind of a description of what the scene looked like, and we'll go over all of that here in the coming days. But then we skip ahead to verse 8, and it says, they read from the book of the law of God, here it is, making it clear and giving the meaning so that the people could understand what was being read. Okay, first of all, everybody's there. Now, if we're talking about right now, you wouldn't need to say as much about it. But we're talking about a long, long time ago when there were very different sensibilities and different cultural realities. Roles were very different in society. And what we're getting a description of here is the whole assembly is showing up. Men, women, children. Well, when you speak to a room that includes children, you have to change what you're doing a little bit. And if you're speaking in 444 BC and all of the women are present as well, they've occupied a different role in society than the guys do. And so you're going to need to frame it differently with the fact that the ladies are present as well and that they're eager to be a part of this covenant and own their part of it as well. And then you've got the guys who are here as well, and they've got Persian sensibilities and they've got pressures economically and all the things that come along with being who they are. So this is a complex thing. It's not going to be quick. You really are explaining the law to 3 very different sets of ears in this environment. And no doubt it took a really long time. And that's why I think that there's no way they could have got through the entire Pentateuch in that amount of time. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I mean, sometimes I do take parts of the Bible and try to think real hard about it and explain it to a diverse audience. So not an expert, but I have tried it. And it kind of takes a minute if you're trying to make it really stick and sink in and you're really trying to think about it honestly. So I bet they just got through Deuteronomy So my guess is that they were just following the beats of the meeting described in the book of Deuteronomy, with Ezra standing in as something of a surrogate for Moses and his role, explaining the law for a second time to the people so that they might understand it and internalize it and write it on their hearts and commit themselves to it. And then the people here in Nehemiah at the Watergate are standing in for the people in the desert back in Deuteronomy. They're listening to their teacher. They're making sure they understand what they are signing up for and committing themselves to. And they're going to make a big public proclamation of, yeah, we're in, once they get it and they know exactly what it is they're making this commitment to. I said I had a practical thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to this, and it was actually two practical things that I wanted to get to. One was what we dealt with, and the other was a question about how do you actually even make this audible, perceptible to the people out there when so many people are present, you don't have any microphone or electronic amplification. So we'll get to the second of those practical concerns as we get into how they built out this meeting and what it looked like, and potentially what the implications of that would be next time around. Thank you so much to everybody who went and subscribed to my super fledgling little YouTube channel that is this podcast. This is kind of a brave new world for me, because with a podcast the way you and I have done it, the way it's typically distributed, it's not very searchable. And so if anybody's here, they're here without the help of the algorithm. I'm guessing that's true of you. You hear it because you found it or somebody told you about it, or sometimes I put things on Facebook and maybe you saw something over there. I don't know how you got here, but probably not because an algorithm suggested it to you. Well, people are going to start to find this thing via the YouTube algorithm now, based on it all being suddenly searchable. And I think it's going to be a very interesting thing. And what I would love to do is kind of cue the YouTube algorithm as to who might enjoy this by having you subscribe to it. It really is a big help in framing this the right way and getting it in front of people. So thank you to all of you who took a moment to do that. I really do appreciate it. If you don't want to do that, it's not weird. That's totally cool as well. All right, next time around, we're going to talk about how Ezra was able to be heard in such a big, giant open air setting. And we're going to talk about implications that I think kind of matter coming out of that as well. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast exists because many of you kick in to make it happen, even though you don't have to. Learn more at thetmbh.com/support. We're grateful because that supports our family.